Welcome, Zachary Smith. Thank you for being here to chat with me about financial healing and reimagining money as a tool for liberation. I was saying earlier, I'm so excited for this conversation because money and finances growing up is something we just never talked about. And so this is sort of my inner child in me that's, excited to be able to talk about money and learn about money in a way that is just a healthy relationship. So thank you for being here. A little bit about you. You're a seasoned financial executive, investor, and founder of 555, a firm dedicated to empowering minority and women-led businesses and expanding access to capital in underserved communities. With over 25 years of experience at institutions like Morgan Stanley, Crescent Capital, and Wells Fargo, you bring deep knowledge of private markets and a bold vision for economic equity. And through partnerships with organizations like Redemption Holding Company, which we'll talk more about, and your work with the National Black Bank Foundation, you've reimagined what financial institutions can look like when they're rooted in community, equity, and long-term impact. So my first question to you is, what does generational wealth mean to you? And how has your personal story led you into this work?
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm super excited about this conversation, and give some of my knowledge back. So what does generational wealth mean? I think one of our best resources is time, and generational wealth allows you time, time to spend time with people you want to spend it with, time to do the things you want to do, and times to better yourself. And when you don't have generational wealth, you lose your time. You have to do things that other people don't have to do because they've got time. They don't have the resources to really allow them to do the things that they really want to do. Yeah. And it's a cycle. I got to speak to Roland Hall a couple of weeks ago following our conversation at the Impact Summit. Yeah. And I got to go in and talk to the students, and they were asking me this question. And I said, think of, your grandfather passes away, and they bought their house in 1940, whatever, for, let's call it $50,000. And they pass away in 2000, and that house is appreciated to, let's choose around like $100,000, right? So from 40 to 100,000, that 60,000 now goes to the next generation. And that was money that they didn't have. And then if your mom or my mom or our dads got to take that money, invest it in a house or something like that, and that house went from worth, let's again, using round numbers, $100,000 in 2000, and then they sell it or they pass away in 2025, and it's gifted them, and let's say that worth is now it's $500,000. Now that goes down to the next generation, and you can see how that spiral can really benefit those communities that have generational wealth versus those that don't.
Yeah, and your personal, how did you end up in the world of financing?
So I can remember being a third or fourth grader at Whittier Elementary School on the West Side, and we did like a careers day, and I showed up to be a banker. And so there was something about that, whether it was like my dad's first job, when he was done playing football was a teller. He was a banker for Walker Bank. And then my great uncle was also a banker. And so I don't know if it was that representation of seeing my ancestors or my elders do this, but somehow banking got instilled in me. And I just fell in love with it. And I've spent my entire career in banking. From literally my first job in banking was 1998, and have done a lot of different things in banking and even doing more today.
Wow. Because I think of banking, I just it's just my own personal beliefs. But when I think of banking, I just think of capitalism and just, I don't belong in those spaces. So it's interesting for you to get into the world of banking, and your background is really interesting because you were born here in Utah, raised here in Utah, and you have an ancestry and lineage of those in sort of the financial institutions. Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I was born and raised here in Utah. Went to Skyline High School, played baseball down what was Dixie College, now Utah Tech. Got a finance degree at the University of Utah. The last 2 years when I was at the U, I worked full-time at Zions Bank and had this unbelievable experience of going to work from 6 to 8 a.m. in the morning. And then I went to classes at the U. I would do like an 8:30 class and then maybe like a 9:50 class and then be able to go back to work. And I was lucky enough to have these unbelievable mentors that allow a kid that looked very different than them to ask questions. And they would get a whiteboard out and I would ask theoretical questions around what we learned in class, and they would explain it to me on a whiteboard in like real world terms. So that was an incredible start to a journey that's been a long journey, both in Utah. I've lived in San Francisco and done banking. I've lived in Los Angeles and done banking. I've lived in New York, and I've spent a lot of time in New York and done banking with the people I've been lucky enough to be employed by.
Yeah.
And now this opportunity comes along to really come home and bring, approximately 30 years of battle scars, I guess, to this new endeavor.
When it comes to money and legacy in Black and Brown communities, what are some of the biggest barriers? Yeah.
Ashley Bell, the executive chairman of Redemption, and Dr. Bernice King will talk about what our mission is, and our mission is to be that last mile of capital access to communities that just don't get access today. There's a couple of different stats you could look at. Today 45% of African Americans own a home. That compares to something around 65 or 70% of Caucasian Americans. When we do afford a home, oftentimes the rate that we pay is a lot higher than our Caucasian counterparts. We're denied credit significantly more than others. If you look at, venture capital funding, something this next generation really likes to get excited about, and 2%, 3% of venture capital funding goes to women and brown-faced entrepreneurs and stuff. And so there's just a tremendous lack of capital going to underserved, underrepresented communities that look like, you and I. Yeah. And it can make a big difference. I was able to, in that same class at Rowan Hall, they were talking about redlining, and what is the effect of redlining. And if you look at that, redlining is where the federal government and mortgages, et cetera, weren't allowed to go into these areas, or if they were, it was significantly more expensive from a cost perspective. And in those areas, you have less parks, you have food deserts, and you have lack of really healthy things for children to do and stuff. So it's a big issue. And Ashley likes to say that where water flows, things grow, and where capital flows, things also grow. Yeah.
And that's interesting because here in Utah, so when you talk about redlining, what are you seeing this still play out today? Because I was in the banking space for a little bit. And a lot of people just didn't really believe that right now we're experiencing the impact of redlining. It is so many years ago. It's in the past. It's history.
Yeah.
Do you still see the impacts of that here? I know it's a silly question, but I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah. If you look at just infrastructure compared to the east side of Salt Lake versus the west side of Salt Lake, significantly different. If you look at like the number of grocery stores on the east side versus the west side, if you look at like schools and the testing of schools and how students are performing, et cetera, a big difference. Entrepreneurism, a lot less capital on the west side than it is on the east side, and people have their dreams and stuff. So it still exists today, and that's not only a Utah thing; it's a nationwide thing.
Yeah. So this is interesting because in my household, we weren't allowed to talk about money because it was either seen as either disrespectful, or if you talk about it, people will know about it, and if they know about it, then they might give you the evil eye. Like that is one thing, at least in my culture. I'm sure there's several other. What are some other sort of ideologies or sort of attachment to money that you've seen in Black and Brown communities?
Yeah. I think the obvious is, lack of resources, of course. You see that in Black and brown communities. I think how we choose to spend on things. As a kid, growing up here, I was a bit of a nerd, and oftentimes was kind of bullied because I liked books and stuff, which wasn't the cool thing to potentially do back then. And so I think how we want to portray ourselves, how we want to spend our money, consumerism, etc. I think Jay-Z talked about something around investing in art versus spending money. And so I think African Americans, brown people that have been left behind by the financial system, we haven't had like the extra money to invest for our future, invest in our families, because a lot of times we're living paycheck to paycheck. We're trying to make ends meet.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about Redemption Holding Company. And you talked a little bit about the founding members, and then you've talked about the mission, but what is Redemption Holding Company?
Yeah. So Redemption Holding Company is a platform that we're building. I'm lucky enough to be partnered with Ashley and Dr. King to bring her dad, his vision to reality. And it's access to capital. Our goal is to work with entrepreneurs, single moms, Black and brown face folks to help them get access to capital. And have it be that it's not a no, but how can we work together to put yourself in the situation where you can get access to that capital through financial literacy, through education programs, through advocacy programs at various higher ed institutions to help you get that business plan on the right situation, so that we can say yes.
Yeah.
And that's our goal. Our goal is to really provide capital to those families and those entrepreneurs that just don't get access to it today.
And how did you connect with Dr. Bernice King, and how did that happen?
Yeah. Again, going back to like having unbelievable mentors.
Yeah.
Bruce Jensen, who will be the CEO of this bank, called me during COVID, and he said, "I've been approached by a group of investors to buy a bank in Utah, and you were the first person I thought of." And so he explained to me what the bank was, what its mission was, who the investors were, that it would be Utah's first minority depository institution and the only Black-owned bank between Houston and Los Angeles. And I just fell in love with that. And they were buying a bank in my backyard, where I grew up. When I went to high school, I grew up in Holiday, Utah, and they were literally buying a bank in Holiday, Utah. And so once I heard about it, I was like, yeah, this is, and I'd spent a lot of time researching the lack of access to capital to brown and women, et cetera, and just thought this was an unbelievable vehicle to play my part and help out.
Yeah. How do people, I'm just thinking about, so you explain generational wealth. What does that look like for people who don't talk about it in their families? How do you breach that conversation? What are ways that, if you're a grown adult in your sort of family and you're trying to lead a conversation around financial, generational wealth and financial literacy, how do you even start that when those conversations aren't normalized?
Yeah. So I think talking about what access to capital can mean, and just even what credit is. There's a lot of communities that don't have credit scores. I want to say there's a number of, I think it's like 4.5 Americans that are completely underbanked. There's a bigger number as to those Americans that don't even have FICO scores or credit scores, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And being able to talk about what the credit system or even the financial system can afford you and allow you to do, is a tremendous opportunity there. Financial literacy can start just as early as in high school, mm-hmm. talking about how, you pay for school lunch, potentially, how you pay for groceries, how you pay for gas. Yeah. A lot of families don't talk about the difference between, say, a debit card, which money leaves your account, versus a credit card, mm-hmm. Which money is, put aside and you owe, and how do you pay that back? And so trying to have real world conversations just about day-to-day activities is a way to kind of start with financial literacy conversations.
Yeah. Do you think that because today's economy, it's really tough, and there's people who are struggling, who are out of jobs, and then you talk about Black and brown communities, and we're talking about generational wealth, and people are trying to live day to day. How do you have conversations around generational wealth to those who are trying to survive?
Yeah, it's hard, and especially in today's day and age, it becomes very difficult. I think trying to put any little bit away as early as you possibly can, and I think generational wealth and this conversation also goes back to education and being able to go to college and learn about some of these opportunities and. Graduate
like you need
high school.
wealth to go to college.
Yeah,
and it's like the whole thing.
It's a disastrous cycle.
Yeah.
And it's one that if you get stuck on the other side of it, it becomes really hard to break.
Mm-hmm.
You almost need an angel-like figure or something like that to come in and kind of help you break that generational cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've talked a lot around, the healing aspects of life and, just thinking about like generational pain.
Mm-hmm.
You need, at some point, you need some generation to step up and say like, enough is enough, and they've got to break the cycle, but it's really, really hard.
So you think so even saving a little bit, what would that look like? I'm just thinking about I'm thinking about young people. I'm thinking about people out of jobs. I'm thinking about people who have to feed mouths, and like just all the different people and their circumstances. What does that?
Yeah, even a dollar a day can go a long way. It's a rhyme. I didn't mean to say it that way, but just saving a little bit over time, because how money works is it compounds, and that money is earning money. And if you start saving just a little bit here and there, you'd be surprised at how fast it adds up. At the end of the year, if you just $1 a day, that's $365 earning something, and then the next year that's $700 and some odd dollars, and then all of a sudden you cross 1,000, and that's not even assuming interest and such. And so just every little bit counts, and
starting
as early as possible as you can will make a difference, because compounding helps.
Compounding. And do you think that it needs to be in banks, or because I'm thinking about my so it's interesting because generationally my parents and maybe even their parents, cash on hand is a big deal. Mm-hmm. There's a mistrust in systems, right? So for them, it's always have cash. Always have cash. Don't trust institutions to hold your money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for someone who is building institutions, what do you say to someone who is like, no, you need to have that cash, but if you're holding cash, you're not really compounding it.
No, it's
not in a big way. You're doing it little by little.
Yeah. There's probably a healthy balance between, cash you're holding for your sanity and safety reasons, if you will, and cash that you're willing to put into a bank account. And I think it starts with bank accounts, and then from there it grows. And for those, those folks that are, working at organizations that have 401k plans, especially if they have matching plans, that's an easy way to do that, because your employer will match up to some percentage, assuming your employer is matching, of whatever you're contributing. Yeah. And so now instead of $1, you got $2. And so that's another way to, start putting money away early in a career. And then again, over time, that match, that compounding will really help out.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, well, tell me this, what has been your relationship with money? Has it always been positive?
It ebbs and flows. I'm a kid that I had a lot of privilege in my life. I grew up in which was unusual because my dad was successful, and so I had a lot of benefits of money early in my career, or in my childhood, and then in my early adult years. But as you have kids, and you try to teach them things, and then you try to provide for them in ways that, maybe you weren't provided for, or things you wanted to do differently. There's, money is there's only so much that goes around. So you have to make decisions.
Yeah.
And in my life and with my wife, we've really focused on education. So making sure that our kids had the best education, and making sure they got to go to college, and making sure they got to go to the college that they wanted to have the experience that they wanted to. And so those are sacrifices that we've made versus spending money in other ways. And don't get me wrong, like I still lived a pretty great life, and it hasn't been, ultra challenging, but those are things that I've had to make a personal thing around, paying for, giving forward my kids and giving them just a little bit better life than I had. Because my dad gave that to me. Right. And so I'm stepping on his shoulders, and hopefully my kids will step on my shoulders. And they'll do something even far greater than what I'm able to do.
Yeah. Do you think that so you're saying that with education and resources, there could be a healthy relationship to money. Is that fair to say? I mean,
I think
if you can decide for yourself
the
type of relationship you have with all of your knowledge.
I think the more educated about anything you get, the better relationship you can have with it.
Yeah. What is it like a positive relationship to money? Because I feel like I grew up in a household that was more scarcity, and just sort of we only have a little bit. We don't just spend what we get, and we had to work. I mean, working hard was the biggest thing. I mean, that was in order for you to make it in this world, in order for you to be successful, you have to work really, really hard.
Yeah.
So money felt like it was hard to get.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of scarcity mindset. If I don't work hard enough, then I won't make the money that I need to make to support my family or give back to my parents or my community or whatever that looks like.
Yep.
Is that okay? Because it feels like it might be a driving force.
Yeah.
Or is that does that feel a little bit limiting?
I think the whole premise around hard work and hard work turns to money, I wouldn't say it's a wrong one, but I go back to what I said earlier around like time, and generational wealth. I think what money can bring to you is time. I spend a lot of time reading Arthur Brooks' stuff, and he talks about with your money you should use it to spend time with people you want to spend time with, so experiences. You should donate the money because those donating money or giving money to someone else tends to lift you up. Saving it tends to make you feel better because then you can see a progress or a path, or you feel like you're getting ahead when you see that dollar amount raise. And then, going into debt and spending money on things that just don't matter, I think it becomes hard.
What are those things? Like, what would that look like?
Well, for me, what I love spending money on is experiences. So I'm all about, how can I have an unbelievable experience with my wife and my kids and family? And that's pretty much it. Like, that's my big thing I spend money on. Which means dinners, because I've got, older kids, and when you can get them around a table for like 2 hours to talk, that's how I want to be with them, or vacations or things like that. I share a car with my wife. So that's something that we've made a decision. Our kids, they share cars and stuff. And so it's just making decisions around the edges as to, what is the value of money to you? You as in me, or like a person, like ask yourself that. And I think you can figure out like what makes you happy. I don't buy clothes. My wife buys my clothes. So like, I wouldn't spend money. If I keep coming, I'd wear pajamas or sweatpants, but that wouldn't be appropriate. And so, I spend it on like experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that because, and I like the question, posing the question, what does money, what do you value the most, and how can money help you get? Yeah,
I think things are just things.
Things are things, right?
Things are things. Plenty of things over a lifetime, but like what joy can those things bring to you? And I think there's been a lot of studies. I think Scott Galloway talks about this around. There's certain points of happiness based upon how much money you make. And then you break certain points where there is no more happiness.
What's that point? What is it?
It's I think it's like 50,000, and then you break 50 and you get to 100,000, and there's another point there, and then you get to like 250 and there's another break, and then like 1 million is another break, and you see these big jumps of happiness, but at some point it levels out because again, money is just money. Things are just things.
Yeah.
And can it really improve upon your lived experiences?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, because I think this is interesting. A lot of immigrant families start their own businesses, and they rely on the bank, but sometimes that's always been a tough relationship. How are you seeing entrepreneurs right now, and their relationship to asking for monies? And you yourself are set out to invest in Black and brown communities that are entrepreneurs. Is that right? So what are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, these entrepreneurs have tremendous amount of grit and hustle. They have great ideas. One, two, they've got the tenacity and the grit to make really hard decisions and fight through barriers and such. And yet, only 2 to 3% of venture capital funding goes to these types of entrepreneurs. So a lot of times,
is that because of just
it's just
flat out racism?
It's just biasness. It really is. It's hard for. I think there's a lot of material about this. Is that investors tend to invest in things that they understand, and even just sitting across from someone, if they look different than you, if they have a different background than you, then theoretically they don't understand you. And so these entrepreneurs are scrappy. They hustle. They have a drive. They bootstrap it. They find different ways of cutting corners, at least from monetary corners, than maybe what a traditional entrepreneur does. And so they find just different ways to solve these problems. And I'm a big believer in what was done in the past doesn't need to be done today. And we can think about, solving these problems differently going forward. And it really aligns with this idea of inclusion, that if you can hear me and I can hear you and you can see me and I can see you and we trust each other, there's like no problem that probably a group of 12 people couldn't get in a room and solve.
Yeah.
Just based upon inclusion and trust.
Yeah. Well, how do you build that trust though? So I'm thinking about just like I was saying earlier, my family, even my mom, she just recently took money and, put it into a bank. And just a couple of days ago, she's like, I don't know what they're doing with my money. And she's getting she has anxiety around it because it's just sitting there. And she's like, could it be gone? Could it, it's sitting in I believe in a money market. And she's just like, I don't know what's going to happen with it. And there's a deep level of anxiety. How do you build that trust, with redemption, holding company, and just if you're trying to reach to Black and brown communities, how do you build that trust? Where do you start?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things there. One is our investor base. So if you look at our investors, we'll be a minority depository institution and we'll be an African-American minority depository institution. And so people that look like us that come from similar backgrounds see that, we are the investors as well. And so there's a little bit more of a trust. They'll see themselves there. I think the other piece is there are safeguards in the financial system to protect people's investments or deposits in banks. Like the FDIC insurance goes up to $250,000. So if you have less than $250,000 in any one bank, the federal government's insuring that. So it doesn't really matter what happens to ABC Bank or XYZ Bank if you fall under that FDIC insurance. So just even if you're fortunate enough to have more money than that, then just diversify to other banks to give you comfort, to ease that anxiety.
And that all comes again back to what you're saying.
Financial literacy. Education, financial literacy.
That information's not readily out there.
Though. And then that's one of the things that we'll be doing. There's a lot of programs out there from institutions already here in Utah, like Utah Tech down in Southern Utah. We'll be forming a strategic partnership with them around financial literacy. Utah State University, same thing. The University of Utah, Salt Lake Community College. So all these higher ed institutions, we want to, how do we tell a financial literacy story just a little bit different to educate these students and the younger generation, even the older generation at the same time. But then there are banks here in Utah, like Celtic Bank or American Express or Optibank or whatever who they may be, that have programs for financial literacy that already exist. And so how can we build on those programs and take them to the communities that we represent so they get access to that knowledge, access to that education and programs.
Yeah. So let's talk about Utah.
Yeah.
Because we're a red state.
Yep.
And rolled out a lot of bills that are against diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. You use the word inclusion. How do you navigate that in a red state? Because, and you see, I mean, you're telling, even viscerally, you can see there's a big difference between the West Side community and East Side community. That is our line. Like, when you've left the West Side community and you've gone into the pristine East Side community where trees are trimmed and libraries are brand new, and it's just a different. Grocery stores are full with ripe produce, and you just see a big difference, and so with our conservative mindset and all the things that are basically erasing the fact that there even is a divide. How are you navigating that?
I think it was fascinating as we went down this path looking for investors to invest in this bank and support us. And I think what became an amazing story is how welcoming the families of Utah have been to Redemption. One, hearing the story of what we're trying to solve for, and then two, them saying, yeah, we agree, and how can we help? Which, there's an old adage, put your money where your mouth is type of thing. And these families have done that and supported us. Even, the governor's office of economic opportunity has supported us in a number of ways. And so in a lot of ways, I think Utah is leading out in this and making sure that, access to capital, access to, financial systems is something that all Utahns agree with and should have access to. And even in conversations with Utah Housing Corporation and some of the things that, Redemption and some subsidiaries will be doing, and them wanting to bring, more affordable housing, a different affordable housing product to the market so that people can start home ownership. Maybe not what's there today, but how do we think creative and innovatively to develop new products and services to change this generation?
So Utah's been fairly supportive of you.
100%. It's been amazing. I think if anyone were to say, a group of African American investors buy a bank and choose a domicile, I don't think anyone would have chose Utah.
No.
But even Dr. Bernice King has mentioned, one of the few places that she would consider living other than Atlanta was Utah.
Really?
And that had to do with some personal relationships she had with some of our investors, very prominent family here, and her spending time with them and understanding, what they're going through and how they're dealing with life issues, et cetera. We start to realize that we're all pretty similar. We all kind of want the same things, access to healthcare, access to education, a more prosperous life for our children. Those things are kind of universal, whether you're red, brown, blue, or anything. And I think those common ground issues are things that, we've been able to close the gap on.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very unique, and I don't want to paint Utah in a, I mean, there's a lot of news around Utah too, so I'm not really painting the picture, but that is a very different viewpoint, and very different experience. So it's refreshing.
Yeah. And hopefully it's a sign for, change that's coming.
That's right.
And change that will be led and sparked by Utah taking the lead.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Redemption Holding Company, you said that's going to be fully online. It's an online platform, and there's a physical location in Holiday, Utah.
Yeah.
Or going to be a physical location in Holiday, Utah.
Yeah.
So anyone can access banking through Redemption Holding Company across the nation. Is that right?
Yeah. We will be a one branch bank to start. We will be building out a best-in-class technology platform. In fact, we just had a call with a Utah-based company this last week around utilizing their mobile app services of how do we, spread this word not only from Utah but across the country, because we know that people don't go into banks anymore to handle financial transactions. They use their phone, they use their devices, and so we need to have a technology platform that makes it easy. Makes it convenient and is trustworthy that our potential customers can use.
Yeah. So what for someone who's just starting their wealth building journey, and you mentioned students, what's one belief or shift you wish more of us held around wealth?
Shift your belief around wealth. I think wealth is it's defined differently for everybody, and you could be the wealthiest individual in the world and not be very happy. We see the Christmas movies like Scrooge, and all of that and such, and I think there's this preconceived idea that if you have a bunch of money, you're going to be happy. And I just don't think that they're a one-to-one thing. I think wealth is defined as wealth in your relationships, wealth in your experiences, wealth in do you believe in yourself, and do you love yourself type of thing. And to only tie wealth to some monetary value, I don't think is a good advice. Yeah. I think you can be fairly non-monetarily wealthy and still be wealthy and
happy
because you've got your priorities right.
Yeah.
It helps, and it goes back to time. I think I mentioned earlier. I think generational wealth. I mean, what it can do is buy you time to do the things you want to do and with the people you want to, but it doesn't. Wealthy is a mindset.
Yeah. So for my, I have a 5-year-old son, and I, again, I don't know much about, generational wealth. I'm just dabbling and speaking to you and learning about it. What, well, let me summarize and tell me if this is right, but doing some investments, saving as much as you can. What are some other things I can do now and I'm an entrepreneur, so it's not like I'm rolling in all this cash. But what are some things that I could be doing now to help set up future generations? And then I also say this too, is that the goal now? Because again, things are changing. And so is the goal for us to try to educate future generations, or is it to help set them up and educate them at the same time? Or where should our priorities be?
Yeah. Tough question. I'll answer from how I try to work within my family, and right or wrong or indifferent. That's the things that we're trying to do. I have, so you think about like the next generation, which will be theoretically smarter than this generation, more connected than this generation. Investing in them is a huge priority for me, because I think the things that they're going to accomplish, I look at over time what we've accomplished by generation, right? Like we had electricity, then we had cars, and we had phones, and now we've got AI. Like those things didn't happen in the first, it happened over time with evolution. And so clearly this fear of like the next generation is going to screw it up for all of us is wrong, because history has shown us that it doesn't. And so investing in that next generation, I think, is something that's really important, which means, giving them, stability homes, stability living environments, which maybe it means owning a home, which creates some generational wealth. Educating them and making sure that, they're getting the proper ways of going to school, whether that's higher ed or some type of trade school or whatever, so they can play their part in this world, and then just teaching them about a relationship with money and almost like not making money the thing. It goes back to like, how do you define wealth? And does $2 make a person wealthy, or does that give someone value? I think it's more of like, how do we allow this next generation to really value themselves as unique people of who they are, so they can go off and do the things that the amazing things that they'll do in the future.
Oh, because that's interesting too, because you get so attached to jobs that pay you, and your pay is then attached to your worthiness or what you feel like you bring to the table. And if you get paid less, then you feel less worthy. And I know that is a lot of our generations and past generations. They kind of measured their worthiness and what they were getting paid and what they were making or what they were able to build.
Yep.
What would you say is different now, or how could we change that particular generational ideology, I guess, around wealth?
Yeah, I think again, like I think wealth can be defined in so many different ways away
Yes.
from money, and wealth of relationships, and like deep relationships, right? Like not these superficial relationships that occur on social media with likes and whatever, but like really deep relationships where you can have a conversation with someone and feel like they're hearing you and you're hearing them, etc. And then just trying to find joy and happiness in what you do. I think so much of the system, and it's been interesting to see how productive the economy was during COVID, and yet we come out of COVID and certain employers want everyone back to the office type of thing. And there's probably some benefits and negatives about that, but we don't have to do things the way we did. We don't have to do things the way they were, and we can change and be creative and innovative of how we, what do we want our lives to look like going forward? Yeah. And every person on this earth is like such a unique individual that like no two people want the same thing, and no one can be the same thing as someone else. And so just really appreciating that in ourselves and finding joy and loving ourselves so that we can be that unbelievable person that we believe we can be, hopefully that we believe we can be.
Yeah, and we're not attaching ourselves to things that, like money. If
Yeah.
we're attaching our worth to that, it'll be a dangerous path.
Yeah, 100%.
So
100%.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything you would like any of our listeners to know about generational wealth or Redemption Holding Company? Maybe how people can find you? Is it? I think last time I talked to you was going to launch pretty soon here. So is there anything that we need to keep an eye out?
We got FDIC approval in April. We hope to open in June.
Okay. Oh, so soon. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And this will start as a Utah revolution, if you will, and hopefully go nationwide in the next couple of years.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll leave a link once we get all of that to
that'd be great
as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zachary. I appreciate you, and thank you for doing the work that you do, especially here in Utah, and the relationships that you're building and the stigmas that you're really debunking. And so I really appreciate you, and I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity, and hopefully we'll go on this journey together to
Yep.
solve these problems.
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you.